If you're a director, you got to find a good cast, a good crew, like we were saying, heads of departments, and just package it the best way possible. So when you go to a Netflix or you go to any studio, they really respond to the package. They're like, oh, we love this filmmaker. We love this actor. They have a lot of value. Let's go do something.
Welcome to There to Here, an educational podcast where industry professionals talk nuts and bolts and how they got from there to here. On today's show, Jorge Garcia Castro shows us the ins and outs of Netflix distribution and where to start if you have a film but nowhere to take it. As this is a new podcast, we're really wanting feedback, so go to media.collabinc.org, fill out the feedback survey, and you'll be entered to win a $25 Amazon gift card. Congratulations to this week's winner, Nicholas Cueto. From Collab Inc., I'm Tanya Musgrave, and today I have the multi-talented Jorge Garcia Castro, a Netflix producer, visual effects pro, and industry entrepreneur, where he undoubtedly uses his Harvard master's degree in finance and strategy. He's also done VFX and consulting for Sony and Disney projects such as Tron Legacy and Netflix projects such as Bird Box. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So from Harvard to Hollywood, I'm extremely interested. What's your There to Hear story?
I actually started as a strategy consultant at PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I always wanted to be in the industry. I knew I didn't want to be an actor or anything like that, but I didn't know much about the industry. So I thought the best way to, understand it was to go into consulting. So I went into consulting mainly in the media and entertainment sector. So my main clients were like Viacom, Sony, NBC, Universal. So that's where I started to learn how the industry worked and where I could fit in. And that eventually led me to work for Sony in a similar capacity, in a similar strategy in New York. But they were having issues with some of their productions in terms of process. Like they were going over budget on certain things that they shouldn't be going over budget because there were no controls in there. So they asked me, like, can you go in there and see what you can do? So that was kind of like my first on-location production involvement, and I had no idea what I was doing, right? So I was just asking questions, learning, and eventually that led me to move to LA to work for Disney. A colleague of mine at PricewaterhouseCoopers had started to work at Disney, and he thought I could be a good fit to move there because they were looking for someone to do Spanish language productions. So we moved to LA, and I started working for Disney, working on the visual effects side in terms of similar things where let's figure out how we can be more efficient on visual effects, how can we use the creative in a way where maybe we don't necessarily need to do a visual effect in a certain scene that was planned for, or maybe we could do it better or different. So I started working on that, and then eventually I was able to get the job to lead Spanish language productions for Latin America. So I started really developing Disney branded content that was tailored for the Latin American audience. And it was really hard because it was just to have presence there. So there was nobody was ever going to see them, basically, because there was not a lot of marketing for them. But it was a great experience for me. I made a ton of relationships. I learned a lot. It was great. Eventually that went away, and I started working on the bigger movies. So that's when I started working on the Tron and Alice in Wonderland, Pirates of the Caribbean, etc. And at one point, I thought it was, for me, time to move on and start my own thing. And that's when I decided to leave, and I started my own company, which was another, a new venture, which I didn't know. Once you don't have, the Disney name behind you or the financing behind you, it's a whole new world.
When people think of Hollywood, they think, oh, you're going to be a director, you're going to be an actor, you're going to be, something super, super, flashy, like that kind of thing. But the reality is that like all of that stands on the shoulders of the foundational things like finances, knowing the business behind things. And for the majority of our listeners, that's probably our weakest point is, the production and the development side, the market research, anything having to do with that. And then also distribution. So I'm very interested because you seem to have hands in both of those sides. You had mentioned a company that you had started. You are involved with entrepreneurship. Tell us about some of the companies that you started.
So when I left, I started a company called Altered LA with a partner of mine. His name's Marcos Klein. He is very seasoned in the commercial space. So he represents directors for commercials, mainly for the US Hispanic market. So he had been doing that a lot. He had been producing a lot of commercials, a lot of short form content, and he had a really good roster of directors. And I kind of had like the development background. So we decided to join forces where I could work with his directors, and we could use the commercial space as part of, the revenue stream. And then we could start features on TV. So we started that. It still exists. We're still doing great. We have a great roster of directors that we still work with. And most of the content that we do is through Altered. I also started recently a company called Inclusion Management with other partners, Mucho Más Media. And that came from me consulting on the US Hispanic market for studios. I was noticing that a lot of people don't understand who the talent is in the US Hispanic market. And a lot of the time I was, recommending all these directors and writers for jobs and actors, and they were getting the jobs. And, I wasn't taking any, not that I wanted credit, but I wasn't getting anything out of it except, obviously getting those people out there, which is very important. But I thought nobody was representing them the right way. And I thought there was an opportunity for us to actually, that we understand the US Hispanic market so well, coming from the production space, the commercial space, sorry, and coming from Disney Latin America. So I thought that nobody understands this talent and how they should be represented more than us, and we should be representing them. So we started Inclusion Management about, I think it's almost 2 years now.
Yeah.
And we represent writers, directors, and actors, and it's been great. It's been great. We have a great roster of talent that we are. Some are seasoned, some are not, and we're helping grow that. And the truth is that in the US Hispanic market, there's not a lot of talent. We need to grow that pool of talent. So
that's a market right there, and we'll get to foreign markets.
Yes.
Definitely. But like one question, did we cover how you got into Netflix?
Oh, I don't think we did.
Like, I want to hear that story. How did you get into Netflix?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, I do a lot of consulting for studios on the US Hispanic content side of it. Well, I actually got into Netflix 2 different ways. So one was because they had a project that needed some help because it was going to be shot in Mexico, and it had some, Hispanic elements that they wanted to get right, and they wanted to have the right partners who they were going to shoot with in Mexico. So they called me in to consult and help them with that. And then from that, the VFX, so the head of VFX at Netflix was a person that I worked with at Disney. So we connected again, and he asked me to go help him do some things on the VFX side. So that's kind of how I got into that.
And is it like it's like a brick and mortar Netflix? Like there's an actual building, or is it just
the headquarters are in Los Gatos, but there's all the content is done out of Hollywood, so there's an office in Hollywood. So right now, because of COVID, it's closed, so everybody's working from home. It's a great place. I'm really enjoying working there, and hopefully I'll get to do a lot more stuff with it.
We actually did have a listener question on your personal journey on what role or detriment did privilege and or prejudice play.
It's always tougher when you're a minority. You have to work harder. You have to prove yourself harder. You're always fighting for something more than the average white folk, I would say. So I've always had that challenge, but I think like us as minorities, we know that we have that challenge, and that we just have to not make that an excuse and just do what we need to do.
And I feel like your inclusion management really does kind of, I don't know, that's a perfect rebuttal in my book.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a perfect way to deal with it.
Yes. So the US Hispanic market is the biggest minority market by far, bigger than the African American market or the Asian market or any minority.
Really?
Yeah, it's huge. The buying power is over $1 trillion. They represent over 25% of the box office tickets sales. The sad part about it is that the US Hispanic market is the least represented out of all. So it's a very underserved audience.
Very untapped well there too.
Correct.
If anybody who's in business.
Yes, but the problem is that they don't know the market, and they don't know how to attack it, and they're afraid because they just don't know the talent or what they're looking for. And the few attempts that have been done have not been done properly, with a lot of stereotypes that nobody wants to see, the illegal immigrant, or, it's always portrayed in a very stereotypical way that nobody wants to see. So it's an untapped market for sure.
I'm curious what the what the stories would be. I mean, I remember you saying, nobody really wants to see another border movie. You know, they don't want to see this this kind of immigrant story in a way, and they're kind of going towards escapism. Like, what is something that market would go for?
I mean, it's really like any other type of content. The more eyes you can get to see it, the more successful you're going to be as a filmmaker, right?
Yeah.
So you got to try to figure out a way where not only you're going to hit the US Hispanic audience in this case, but it can be something broader that anybody can actually see. So I think the idea is to do commercial stuff that just has, you know, Latin leads that are not necessarily poor or the illegal or the maid or, you know, the gardener.
Or the drug lord.
Or the drug lord, exactly. So I think there's a lot of opportunities just to do really compelling, broad commercial content, but that ties to Hispanic. So something like Shonda Rhimes, who does Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder and those things. She has African-American leads in those shows, but it's not about being a slave or, you know, brutality all the time.
It's just for the sake of having a character who's a character.
Correct.
Yeah. No, I remember the very first time that it occurred to me, like, for instance, it was a Netflix. It was just one of those summer teen rom-com things. It was like To All the Boys I've Loved Before, I think. And there was an Asian lead, and there was nothing really drawn to the fact that she was an Asian other than the fact that she was just an Asian lead. That was it. And I remember looking her up later, and she was actually adopted and raised by Caucasian parents, just like me. And it was the first time that I had ever come across a character who was just a character in a movie just because, and a lead, just because she was a lead. That was it. Like, there was nothing drawing attention to.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, that's a really good example.
It was a common thread in our conversation before. You know, I think you had talked about, you know, how people were kind of tired of hearing about projects having to do with the wall or immigration and stuff, but you had come across a really good project that had come from the direction of a thriller, you know, just like a completely different, approachable angle that can still talk about important things, but it's not, it doesn't necessarily have a flag to wave.
Yes. Yeah. I was telling you about this kind of like immigration story, which right now, like an immigration story, especially for Hispanics, is like a no-no. Like, nobody wants to see that. Yeah. It's so stereotypical.
Yeah.
But and everybody's trying to you know, a lot of the content that I get or a lot of the projects that I get are very, like you said, like with flag, with like specific purpose. And I think it's great that people want to, you know, tell these stories because they're important. But it's going to be very hard to get them made today. Hopefully, in the future, it won't. But this guy who wrote it, he found an angle into make it into like a mystery thriller about this kidnapper taking Hispanic kids, you know, and who's the kidnapper and why is he doing it, or she? And he found a way to make it very, like, I want to know what's going to happen next.
Yeah,
you know?
For the sake of the story.
For the sake of the story, but throughout the story, you're hitting on immigration issues and racism and discrimination and all those things. But the way he does it, it's not in your face. Yeah. It's not that. So he tells the message that he wants to tell, but he's also doing it in a very compelling way. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember reading an article. It was a while ago. It was about how there's been a death of the 90s movies, of the 80s movies, where it was just entertainment for the sake of entertainment. Like, where are your Sandlots and the Back to the Futures, where it was just fun, you know? Everything seems to just have a message these days. And not that it's necessarily a bad thing, it's just that it can be exhausting to consume constantly.
I agree. People, especially in this industry, when they ask you what your favorite movie is, they expect you to say something like The Godfather or Citizen Kane or Casablanca, you know? And when I always say Back to the Future, you know, people think I'm crazy, but it's really like such a good movie. That's kind of like what got me interested in the industry. When I was looking at the end credits and I was watching it with an uncle of mine, and he was like, well, those are the people who made the movie. And I was like, oh, you can you can work on it. So to me, it has a lot of value because of those things. That's what I want to do as a producer. I want to entertain people. I want to tell stories that are fun and like you can escape from the world, especially today, for a little bit and just have fun or laugh and cry, whatever it is. And if you can tell a nice message alongside that, that's great. But I don't think every single time it has to be about, having an agenda. Sometimes it's just, you want to have fun, you want to escape. Here's something fun.
Yeah. I think at the root of a lot of the guests that we've had in this kind of thing, whether or not they're an agent or whether or not they're in casting or, if they're a producer or a first AD, kind of the common thread is, they just, like, they're just passionate about it. They don't necessarily have some grand all-encompassing thing that they want to, agenda to push. They're just passionate.
Yes.
We had chatted earlier just about the foreign market and how that kind of works into distribution in general. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like that, this is something where distribution, it's like this nebulous, impenetrable cloud of Fight Club folklore. Like it exists, but like everybody who's part of it seems to be like secretive and like flashing soap bars out of their trench coats on street corners or something like that. Like we have no idea how it works. So how does it work?
There's two types of, in this case, movies, right? Let's focus on feature films and not necessarily series. But there's two ways of approaching how you're going to finance a movie. And one is through a studio and one is the independent route, right? At the end of the day, the distributors are the studios. So if you go and you get a chance to actually sell something to a Disney or a Fox or any of those studios, well, then you don't have to worry about financing or distribution because they'll do it through their platform and you're all set. And that's, everybody's dream in a way, but, there's other caveats that come from that, right? Because you got to go through development and maybe it won't get greenlit and maybe you get other writers to do it, and you might lose some of the creative access for that. But that's a good problem to have. The other approach is through the independent model. And what you and I were talking about is just a few years ago, the independent model was very, very standard in terms of I have a movie that I'm going to make at, let's say, $10 million, which, just for purpose's sake. And I need to pre-sell the distribution, the foreign distribution, to use that money to make the movie. And then I'll sell the USA and Canada, which is North America, after I finish the movie. And that's where I make my money. So that was a very standard process. I mean, it sounds easy, but it's not that simple. So the idea is to get to pre-sale that distribution, you got to have you got to have a package. So you got to have a good script with a director attached and with the talent attached, right? Who's the cast? Who's your, DP, who's, all of that. And once you have that, you go to sales companies, will partner with you and they get a commission out of it and they get credits and they do well. And they will go to all these local distributors in each country or in each region at the markets at Cannes Film Festival or at Berlin or all of these major markets. And they'll go and they'll, try to pre-sell that distribution. And then when you get a commitment from one of these companies, you can go to the bank, get a loan out of that paper and go make that movie. It doesn't necessarily work. It works like that all the time. You sometimes have to get some equity. So you might need to bring in a financier that is willing to take some risk and just put some money down. And they'll recoup from the unsold territories. And eventually you'll make your money. But now, because of Netflix and Apple TV Plus and Amazon and Hulu, Disney Plus, these are all companies that want to buy the world. They want to make it a Netflix original, or they want to make it an Apple TV Plus original or an Amazon original. And what they're looking for is to buy the whole world. So if you go to that old model, which is not so old, but if you go to that model and you start selling some of those territories, then you could potentially lose on making more money on your features or having those studios or those streamers pass on a project because you don't have the entire rights. And then instead of having them buy it, they might do a licensing deal where they'll just buy certain territories for a certain amount of years and then you can get it back, which is not always a bad thing, but it's harder now because you wanna control the whole world so you can sell it to all these buyers because they pay much better.
Okay, so just to recap, you would pre-sell the foreign rights, keep the domestic rights, make the film with the funds that you got with the pre-sold rights. So now they're wanting worldwide rights. What do sales companies see happening? Are sales companies still going to be used?
That's a good question. I think so, because a lot of these sales companies also have financiers. So they also represent investors. Not all of them, but some of them have financiers, or sometimes very good relationships with certain territories in some countries, like China. There's somebody that could be very good for China that, Netflix is not in China, so you could sell those territories. So I think, it's a good question, because I don't know what's going to happen, in 3 to 5 years.
Why not?
I know, but that model's still happening,
Yeah. So it's still in action.
Yes. I don't think it's going away anytime soon, because honestly, it's really hard to get a movie financed, and you might just have to do it that way. And there's companies that are still doing it, and a lot of people, independent producers, still do it that way. Because if you can't get your movie, you have to go in either before you make your movie to some of these studios and hope that they buy it, or you just gotta find someone with a lot of money that's willing to pay for the full budget.
Would they buy you out?
Sometimes they do.
Is that something that you should run away from, or is that something that, is it just kind of in the terms and minutia, or is it something in general that, well, it's kind of going this way, you're going to have to be bought out?
I think it depends. I think the buyouts are usually pay really well. So I think if you are recovering most of your investment or all of your investment with the buyout, it might not be a bad idea. But if you still need to recoup some money and there's a buyout, then you're going to lose money on that movie, which happens a lot also. So I think it's just case by case. But ideally, as a production company, you want to have a library of projects, produced films. So once the rights revert to you, then you have like a library of 5, 10, whatever many movies that you can go and actually sell it as a catalog to one of the distributors, and then make more money.
Wow. Okay.
But that's harder and harder because, like you said, they're doing buyouts. They'll pay you for, we estimate you're going to make X amount of royalties over the next, over the lifespan of this movie. So we're just going to pay you right now.
So how do they decide that? How do they estimate that?
I have no idea. They have some algorithms that they go through. I don't know.
Yeah, because you had mentioned, I think, some sort of formula models where they could predict within like 95% accuracy.
Oh, that's at the box office. So.
Okay.
So if you have a movie that goes into theaters after the first weekend, whatever that number is, they can predict how much it's going to do throughout the entire lifespan of that movie. Not only at the box office, but when they sell it to different windows, which, another window is streaming, VOD, HBO, TV, et cetera, et cetera. So they can predict like to 98% accuracy or something like that, what that movie is going to make just based on the first weekend.
Wow.
And I don't know how they do it, but
that's crazy.
They probably have so much data from the past.
Most likely.
Yeah.
So, for the majority of our audience, we're still kind of in the getting started in the indie film phase. So, like for those not being made by large studios and stuff, like what are the marketing possibilities? Like for foreign market pre-sales, how you, like for somebody who has, for instance, they are making their first feature, what are the marketing possibilities? Do you still try to go and find a sales company? Like what if they've already made it? It's a low budget film. They've already made it. They have it in the can and it's sitting there, but they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah, I think you go and you find one of these sales companies, you show it to them. Hopefully they like it and they can rep it. It's better for sales companies to have a finished product, to be honest, because now they know what it is and they can tell you they can sell it or not, and they can give you estimates. So if you have something sitting there, there's a lot of sales companies, big, small, medium. You were asking like, how do you find these companies? I don't know. I think if you Google foreign sales companies or movie sales companies, there may be, but there's a lot on IMDb. You can find them. The talent agencies like CAA and William Morris and all of them, they also do that. They also do the same type of service as well. But there's all sorts of companies. There's many of them. So it's just a matter of researching it, finding them, and contacting them. Sending them an email. They're always looking for content. So
okay.
So they're going to welcome it.
How much of a percentage do you give up typically when you go to a sales company?
It varies. It could be anywhere from 10% that they make on commission to 35%. So it really varies by company and by your content and how desperate you are, I think.
Yeah. Are there any like specific words or phrases to kind of raise the antennas of alarm if you see it and you're just like, oh, I'm about to get screwed over?
I think there's a lot there.
Welcome to the minefield.
Exactly. I think sales companies, they want to be the producers of that project. They're going to want to get credits, their company to be in the first position. Their reps being credited for executive producing. I think if you see fees like 35%, that's a red flag. Although it happens, they also have a clause, and this is a standard, but I always try to fight it. They also have a marketing clause. So they will say, hey, we got to spend $75,000 because we need to go to Cannes, and we need to go to these, and we need to screen it. And that whatever we sell, that we recoup that first, and then we pay you. You can negotiate it down, and then you can also say, well, why don't half of it goes to you, half of it goes to me. Like, you can do those things, but it's pretty standard that they have a marketing budget for it that they need to recoup first. At the end of the day, you want someone that believes in your movie and that is willing to fight for it.
So you had already kind of talked about the changes on the horizon with like content wars and stuff like that. What along the lines of like new media coming up, like for instance, there is a doc that was shot on 360 that would go to a dome. This is not really it hasn't really been done much before. And so for a new market, there's always a huge risk, number one. But number two, I mean, we had talked a little bit about these new ventures. What are the options for new media? Like say like Quibi.
I think it's just additional buyers. I don't think it's going to change. I think that, if you have short form content like Quibi or YouTube, I think it's just a different format that you can go sell. So if you have something that I think the best way to tell this story is in, 8 to 10 minutes, let's go to Quibi. I don't think it's going to change the landscape of how we do business today in the standard formats of series and features. I just think it's an additional, same with virtual reality and augmented reality. And I just think they're just additional formats that you can go and do content for.
Yeah. Do you think that there is much of a future for those forms of content?
I think there is. I don't know if people want to see 8 to 10 minute, series when you have all these content creators that are doing so well in YouTube, and it's just such a different type of content that their viewers are watching. I think if you want to watch, something with Chris Hemsworth, you're going to go and try and see a movie, or you're going to try and see, binge watch. People love binge watching series, and that's 5 hours or more of your time. So I just think it's probably going to start adjusting and adapting to whatever that's going to end up being.
So we have some listener questions from our Insta and Facebook stories and Twitter. If you want to ask your questions to future guests, our handle on Insta and Twitter is Collab Inc. Podcast. The burning question on everyone's minds, how do we get content on Netflix?
Yes, that is the burning question. Again, I think if you contact a sales company that has contacts there, you can get them to submit to Netflix. Same with talent agencies. If you can get a talent agent to rep your projects, they will submit it to Netflix and Amazon and Apple and all those buyers. And I think you want to get it to as many places as possible. And hopefully you start a bidding war. That's the best case scenario where you have multiple companies bidding for your project. That's the best way to go. I would say 99% of the time, you have to go through a distributor or through a company, a talent agency or a management company, because they don't take submissions like if you go and knock on the door. It has to be through someone, unfortunately.
They
have to have a filter somehow.
Yeah. So for instance, here is a real world example. This real world example is coming from one of our listeners. We are currently in the process of making a feature doc about diabetes in the South Pacific, and we'll be looking for distribution. So wondering if Netflix is a possibility, how do we go about that? Going to those sales companies and trying to make the relationship that way?
I would try the talent agencies. I would try the CAAs, the WMEs, UTAs, those companies first. You can get their contacts through IMDb and just let them know that this is what you have. Maybe if you have a pitch deck, or if you have any more, whatever information you have, I would send that to them and see how they respond. If not, I would go to sales companies that focus on documentaries. I don't really work on the documentary side, so I don't know who those companies are, but I'm sure a lot of them are the same companies.
When did you get an unfair lucky break or unfair biased lost?
I got my unfair lucky break at Sony when they asked me to go and try to figure out what to do in that movie. And I had no idea what I was doing. So I think that was my lucky break. I was waiting for it and I was looking for it and I was trying to set myself for it, but it came a lot sooner than I expected, for sure. And I just took advantage of it, and I was, eating, living, sleeping that until I made sure I did the best job I could. So that could lead to something better.
Amazing. And an unfair bias loss?
Sometimes you just don't get the jobs that you want because of what you represent or who you are. And so I think there's been a lot of cases where we lose to other producers' content because either the size of our company or because people think that because we're Hispanic, we only represent that, or we only tell those voices or those stories. So, it's hard, but you just got to fight. You just got to fight for what you want and what you believe. One of the first movies that I optioned, or scripts that I optioned, was from these studio writers that they were well known and they had done, studio movies. And I told them, I want to make your movie. I love this script. It was a blacklist script. So, it was very coveted and a lot of people wanted it and they got big offers. And they did go talk to everybody. And then at the end of the day, they told me, we're writers and we want to direct this. And nobody's giving them a shot to direct. So I thought, well, that's an opportunity for me. And I told them, I will do whatever you need. I will make sure you direct it and I will protect your vision of how you want to direct it if you let me have this, and I'll be your partner in this. And that's ultimately what they wanted. And they ended up, giving it to me, and we partnered, and we actually made 2 movies together. But nobody was willing to give them a chance except for me. And I think that you just got to find an angle where you can, outshine others. And it's not necessarily about money every time.
Yeah. One of the next questions is, what effect does your job have on the rest of your life?
It's a way of living. It has a big effect. I'll tell you this, I love what I do. So I wake up most of the time very excited and with a lot of energy because I just like what I'm doing. And I like helping people tell stories, and I like finding a good project or developing a good project. So, but at the same time, it becomes kind of like there's a thin line between work and life. So sometimes I don't know when to stop, and I'll be working on a Saturday or Sunday. It can get exhausting. So before you realize it, you're burnt out. It's just a way of life. That if you love it, it doesn't matter.
One of our guests, it was a really interesting conversation because he was talking about how, I think he had been in the industry for a good 20 years. He was the first AD, Corey Pollard, and he was talking about learning for the first time, really, because he had worked in this industry, which is very, very well known for being, well, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. And it's just very, very cut your teeth on diamonds. And here, this is the life that's going to be handed to you. You have to pay your dues. But for the first time, he had really started to learn boundaries and the fact that you are allowed to have a life, that you can say no where it is kind of wrong, or, take that break if you need to, or, that kind of thing. A lot of our listeners are kind of at this kind of crossroads where they are either post-grads, they're getting into the industry, deciding whether or not they want to pursue this further, seeing what the lifestyles are like. We would look around the circle in some of our post-grads, and, every single one of them were single. But the more that I've talked to people who have been in the industry for years and years and years, they join a guild or, the unions, and, they're a little bit more stable. They're not necessarily on anybody's couches anymore, and they have a family, and, so there are possibilities for sure.
Yeah, I think it's, you have to be really passionate about it and you have to love it. But like you say, you can say no, and you can have when you're on set, it's draining, but know there's an end to it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think that's what you have to know. There's an end to
yeah.
the craziness, and also you don't have to work with jerks. Like there's a lot of
Yeah.
bad people in the industry that I think come from a different generation
Uh-huh.
that don't understand that like everybody needs to be respected and treated well. But I think the newer generation does not think like that. I think they understand how collaborative this is, and you need every single person to be motivated and to be happy and to want to be there to get it right.
Yeah.
And I think most people understand that now, at least the people I work with. I've been lucky enough to have really, really good crews and cast on set my last few projects. And I think that's as important as anything else.
Yeah.
Those are the people that get the movies done.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And it's a whole lot more fun, too, if you're surrounded by people that you just have a blast with and you can actually get stuff done.
Yeah. And there's no reason to treat people in a bad way.
No.
There never is. So I don't get why those people are like that. And I do hear a lot that you got to pay your dues and you got to, be a PA and do all that stuff.
Yeah. And I think to an extent that is true.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that they shouldn't work hard or do a great job wherever they've been placed.
I agree. And I think mostly it's because you need to gain experience, because it's not easy. I hear all the time, especially when, award seasons come and everybody's becomes a critic. Everybody's like, well, he's a bad actor or she's a bad actress. And same thing with directing. And at the end of the day, yes, anybody can direct or write or act, but very few people can do it right. And I say that all the time because directing is extremely hard and extremely difficult. And you need to be in all these people's shoes and you need to be part of the crew sometimes. And you need to understand all that it takes. Same with writing and same with acting. So I think it's not easy. And you got to pay your dues because you got to get that experience.
Okay, next question. What is the best thing one can do to get a project picked up by Netflix or any other VODs?
Do we assume it's not a finished movie, right?
Let's just assume that it's not a finished one.
I think the best thing you can do is package it. I think you have to find a good filmmaker. Like if you're a director, you got to find a good cast, a good crew, like we were saying, heads of departments, and just package it the best way possible. So when you go to a Netflix or you go to any studio, they really respond to the package. They're like, oh, we love this filmmaker. We love this actor. They have a lot of value. Let's go do something. Either that, or if you can, just go make your movie. Yeah, there's so many tools today that weren't around even a few years ago that you can actually make a really good project, even with your iPhone. And there's amazing editing tools and VFX tools, and you can do so much. I don't know if you saw these kids from Africa that they copied the Extraction trailer from the movie Netflix. So they basically copied frame by frame. You'll probably see it on social media at some point today or something. It's these kids from Africa with their iPhone, and they just shot literally the trailer of that movie with their phone and with Lego cars and and it looks amazing. It's amazing. So they can do it.
Yeah.
They're very talented.
Yeah.
But my point is, if you're a filmmaker, if you're a director and you're not getting any traction, go shoot something.
What questions should I have asked you?
I think we covered distribution. The marketing part of it is another whole world, but you really have no control over it. It's really the studio and the distributor that decides how much marketing they're going to put into it and if it's going to theaters or not and all that stuff. So I don't think there's a lot of say once you buy it. It's up to them and what they think the value of your project is. Apart from that, I'm not sure. I think having good talent, if you have relationships with actors, I think those are important to get actors into your movies. Same with directors and DPs. I think using your network is important, especially when you're starting out.
Yeah. With COVID, because you seem pretty busy right now. Have things started to gear back up again, or? It's
very slowly ramping back up. There's really nothing going on shooting that I know of, except one or two things that are small. But I've been busy because I was trying to figure out how to, anything that's in post-production that needs to be finished, finding partners around the world that could help us finish it, doing a lot of development, trying to get some commercials going because those are smaller crews. So we're thinking those will ramp up faster. and just figuring out like virtual production, which is a whole nother podcast. Virtual production to me is the future. A lot of it is the future of how we're going to be shooting a lot of things.
Virtual production as in?
It's a lot of things into one, but for example, one of the things virtual production does is you have a soundstage with the LED panels instead of screens.
Yeah.
And you have 3D tracking where really the background looks like you're there, and you have all the lighting there versus like green screen.
What is it called again? It's ILM. Stagecraft. That is,
the way they shot The Mandalorian, all that stuff. Yeah. That's like the massive all-in virtual production way of doing it. But there's also, you can use those panels for driving comps, where instead of having green screens on a driving scene, you will have the interactive lighting. So then you have all the lighting and all the reflections of the lights. So it's just so much more vivid and realistic looking.
Wow.
And then you have the actual things that you're seeing as an actor, and then you can react to them. But you also have things like NCAM, where you can actually see a CG character that you're interacting with live on the shoot. You have pre-visualization, which I think a lot of filmmakers coming out of school are using previs as part of their education, which I think is great because then it's a great tool for planning. And right now, because you can't go anywhere to do location scoutings or to block for your scenes, you can do all that virtually, which is great. Yeah. So I've been looking a lot into that because I think that's the way to get prep movies right now, and just make sure you have them ready. So once you can start shooting, you can just go and shoot, and every scene, how you already blocked it, you already prepped for it, how you're going to shoot the sequence, everything.
What particular jobs come out of that? Like, for instance, if people are wanting to get into that, what should they aim for?
I think there's a lot of jobs around that. Managing the LED component of it is one. It's more engineering and different than being creative. But there's also a lot of this goes through the Unreal Engine pipeline. So using Unreal Engine, which Epic Games owns it, and they do Fortnite through it and all that stuff. It's a game changer because you do live rendering. So everything you're doing is really fast. So as an artist, if you educate yourself on using Unreal Engine to build assets and to build environments, that could be really good. And also DPs that know how to use this and know how to track the 3D tracking and 2D tracking with the LEDs walls. That I think is important. But at the end of the day, if you are on set a lot, and you'll get that experience anyway, except for like the artists that need to be on Unreal Engine and Maya and Unity and all those tools.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it so much.
I'm happy to help.
Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this interview, follow us right here and check out more episodes at media.collabinc.org. If you have comments or know someone who would be a great guest on our show, send in your suggestions to Tanya@collabinc.org. Again, we're really wanting that feedback, so go to the site, fill out the feedback survey, and you'll be entered to win a $25 Amazon gift card. Jorge, thanks so much again for your time. Be well and God bless. We'll see you next time on There to Hear.